One of the things that stuck out to me about the wonderful US public education system is that I remember being taught about the water cycle like 5 or 6 different times, but the only time the nitrogen cycle was even mentioned was in my high school biology class, where my teacher was like, "So this is the nitrogen cycle. You don't really need to know about it. Next slide." I first actually learned about the nitrogen cycle whenever I first got into fish keeping, and I'm sure if any of you know about it, you probably learned about it for the same reason. But this is a massive shame. The nitrogen cycle is one of the most important things that goes on around us, and understanding it can both be applicable and goes a long way in just improving your environmental awareness. So let's start with nitrogen. It's really important. It's the main element needed for amino and nucleic acids. If you don't know what those are, amino acids are the Legos that make up proteins, and nucleic acids are the Legos that make up DNA. So, we need nitrogen, and good news, most of the atmosphere is loaded with the stuff. Bad news, we can't just breathe it in like oxygen. You see, a molecule of pure nitrogen has this big, strong triple bond, and it needs to be converted into a different form before we can use it. And how do we do that? Through our first step in the cycle, nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixation, in broad terms, is basically converting good old stable inert nitrogen gas into ammonia. The main hurdle to this is that the activation energy, the thermodynamic hill the molecules have to climb before the reaction can occur, is stupidly high thanks to Mr. Triple Bond over here. First, there was nothing. Then, there were nitrogen oxides. Lightning is one of the ways nitrogen is converted to not just nitrogen. The high amount of energy in the lightning rips apart the nitrogen atoms, which then recombine with oxygen. This also skips the next step, which we will get into later, but this illustrates how nitrogen gets from the air to the ground. Of course, lightning isn't the main way that nitrogen is fixed. We have our best, sometimes pathogenic friends, microorganisms. Bacteria are how the majority of nitrogen gets from the air into the ground. So, how do bacteria convert nitrogen gas into ammonia? They cheat through enzymatic wizardry. Basically, they have an enzyme called nitrogenase. What this enzyme does is lowers the activation energy of the reaction. This allows the bacteria to be strong, independent organisms who don't need any lightning for bioavailable nitrogen. The really, really cool part about nitrogen fixation is that legumes, plants like beans, peas, clovers, and peanuts, actually have a whole bunch of symbiotic bacteria and specialized root nodules. The bacteria in the roots produce ammonia from atmospheric nitrogen, and in return, the plant gives nutrients and energy to the bacteria. This lets legumes supercharge their growth without the need for nitrogen in the soil. The extra nitrogen allows legumes to be grown without needing lots of artificial fertilizers, which we will get into later, and they can even be used to rejuvenate nitrogen-depleted soil. Okay, thanks for sticking with me through that. Everything after this should be a bit faster to get through. So the next step in the nitrogen cycle is nitrification. This is the part that's really important for fish keepers, and if you don't know about this and have/want a fish tank, please go look more into this after finishing this video. This is basically bacteria processing ammonia into other, less toxic forms. These bacteria are called nitrifying bacteria, and they basically eat ammonia. We have 3 main characters for this: ammonium/ammonia, the difference isn't really important for this video, nitrite, and nitrate. Ammonia and nitrite have a lot of extra energy just kind of sitting in them, so nitrifying bacteria are able to use these compounds as food by oxidizing them and extracting their energy. The final product you get from this is nitrate. This is really important to complex life even just existing, since nitrate is the main form of nitrogen that's actually digestible to plants. While ammonia and nitrate are also able to be absorbed by plants, and in some cases are actually more easily digested than nitrate, they have the tiny problem of being extremely toxic to plants, animals, and bacteria. Nitrate is also technically toxic, but it has to be in a much higher concentration to do so. Now this is where the nitrogen cycle gets weird and messy. You basically have 2 paths the nitrogen can take now, either assimilation or denitrification. I'll start with assimilation. This is pretty straightforward. Plants are able to consume nitrogen, mostly at the end of nitrification, but sometimes directly after fixation. Plants go on to be consumed by us, and boom, that's how nitrogen gets from the air into your body. I have some news for you. You're going to die. Not like right now, but one day. We aren't going to get into like the depressing philosophical questions of death, but instead we're going to be talking about our next step, decomposition. When living organisms die, bacteria go in and start eating and processing all their organic matter, which they then break down into a bunch of stuff. The important one for this is that they produce ammonia. And would you look at that? We have a complete cycle. This is where the nitrogen cycle gets a bit weird, and why it isn't just a straight cycle like the water cycle is. We have our last step, denitrification. Denitrification is pretty simple, and I'll keep it brief since this video is already running way too long. Denitrification is a bit weird. Bacteria, they need something to accept electrons, but some bacteria and most eukaryotic organisms use oxygen to do this, but denitrifying bacteria instead use nitrogen oxides, like nitrate and nitrite, as a way to dispose of extra electrons. The end result of this process is nitrogen gas, and there we have it, the completed nitrogen cycle. Now, why did I tell you all this? It seems really complicated and unimportant, and yes, it really does seem that way. I also really oversimplified it. There's a lot more aspects to the nitrogen cycle than shown in this video. But think back to what I said earlier. The extra nitrogen allows legumes to be grown without needing lots of artificial fertilizers, which we will get into later. The Haber process was invented as a way for us to basically sidestep the nitrogen cycle and to make as much ammonia and nitrogen as our hearts desired. There's a really good Vertasium video about this, so if you want to know more about it, I'll link it in the description for you to watch afterwards. One of the big effects of this, though, is that we could basically pump as much nitrogen into the environment as we wanted. And this has a lot of not great effects, since we're taking a pretty delicate Rube Goldberg machine of ecology and just throwing a bowling ball at it. What I'm trying to get at is that understanding complicated and frankly boring natural systems like the nitrogen cycle is really important in just being able to take in the world around you and really just appreciate the systems that create the natural world, while also letting you understand how we are really messing things up around us. Anyways, the fact you watched the entire video and stuck around to the end means the world to me, and if you enjoyed the video and want to see more, I'd really appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed.